Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Brazier from Audit Board. I'm the Director of Marketing. We want to also thank Donnelley Financial Solutions for helping us out with the CPE credits. And I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with introducing, who Audit Board is and then our primary speaker. So we are a next generation of GRC platform, and that includes we're a SaaS-based solutions provider that we revolutionize the way enterprises collaborate, manage, analyze, and report on critical internal controls data. Our full platform includes SOX compliance through our primary tool, SOX Hub. We also offer operational audits through our tool, Ops Audit. We also do a number of other compliance frameworks, including HIPAA, NIST, ISO, HITRUST, PCI, and more. If you'd like to learn more at the end of this webinar, you can contact Tom, who's going to be our primary speaker, at toreilly@auditboard.com. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tom. Tom is the internal audit practice leader at Audit Board, and prior to joining us, Tom was the vice president and general manager of internal audit at Misty, where he was responsible for the strategic direction and oversight of all internal and IT audit-related training and programs. In addition to that, Tom was the Director of Internal Audit and Chief Audit Executive at Analog Devices and an Internal Audit Manager in EY's Risk Advisory Practice. Another reason why I personally like working with Tom is because he's always an active member of the audit community. He regularly does roundtables and other events with many auditors across the nation. And Tom, I believe you did a roundtable last week in Boston. How did it go?
It went awesome. I think, as anyone who's come to one of our roundtables, they usually end with a standing ovation, and it usually ends much like, I would say it's akin to a Rolling Stone concert.
Well, thank you. Let's. We're happy to have you here, and great to, I'm sure there's going to be a standing ovation at the end of this webcast. So let's go ahead and get started and talk about evolving 5 core tasks to improving internal audit performance.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I can't promise that more bad jokes may not be on their way. So, but today I'd actually like to start off by talking about semiconductors. So for those of you who don't know, semiconductors are the brains of all electronic devices, ranging from your phone, to your automobile, to the machines that make these phones and automobiles. And to no surprise, many semiconductor companies have earned billions and billions and billions of dollars to create, manufacture, and to distribute, the brains of all of these electronic devices that exist today. Now, I'm sure many of you here today have also heard of the phenomena called the Internet of Things. And this phenomena implies that in the not too distant future, all devices and in turn humans will in one way, shape, or form be connected. Now, because semiconductors emit and receive signals, right, think sensors, these semiconductor companies have found themselves smack dab in the middle of the Internet of Things phenomena. So in turn, the executive management teams of these semiconductor companies are now spending a ton of time and a ton of energy and a ton of resources anticipating how the organization is going to succeed in this new environment, what the future of the company is going to look like. And a lot of them, are thinking that it's crazy, but, it could even be unfathomable to believe that within the next 5 to 10 years, these semiconductor companies, which, usually make close to 100% of their revenues in chip or product sales, that they could consider foregoing selling semiconductors and instead give them away for free as long as they're taking ownership of the data that these semiconductors are emitting and capturing and sensing. Now, in order to do so, these companies are going to need to significantly change their approach to business in general across the entire enterprise. For example, these semiconductor companies, which normally manufacture and develop hardware and tangible products, they would now need to develop software applications to be able to capture and transmit and deliver data or their quote-unquote, new products. In turn, their human resources teams would then need to figure out how to exactly attract a new talent base of software engineers as opposed to just recruiting for the typical electrical engineers the semiconductor industry is known for. Subscription fees as opposed to individual product sales would be how the company charges for and accounts for all of their new revenues. Things like legal rights and obligations and the transfer of ownership of the new products would have to be significantly assessed and perhaps even altered. Right? And then when you're thinking about product quality reviews, for semiconductors, these product quality reviews may no longer require to be reviewed just from a batch yield perspective, but instead focus on the security of each and every product and semiconductor that's made for data privacy purposes. So in short, many, if not most of the companies in the semiconductor industry today are going through massive and disruptive change. Now, although this is one detailed example, if each of us look close enough, business is changing all around us, right? I bet if anyone on the phone here asked your Chief Information Security Officer, your CISO, what's been taking up a significant amount of his or her team's time, they'll probably respond with the amount of time needed to perform due diligence for all these new SaaS-based applications looking to be used and leveraged by every department in their organization. Ask any marketing and sales executive how they cultivate new business, and they'll likely highlight the need for inbound marketing tactics and increased use of partnerships or joint ventures, as opposed to cold calling and hiring more salespeople. Terms and concepts and technologies such as Bitcoin and blockchain and robotics and drones and nanotechnology and artificial intelligence, these are all now new business realities and no longer what we would see in our favorite sci-fi movie. In 2016, Deloitte surveyed over 500 chief audit executives, and one of their overwhelming responses was that most internal audit leaders expect our organization to significantly change within the next 3 to 5 years. Now, what was interesting was that I recently had the opportunity to speak at the Institute of Internal Auditors General Audit Management Conference here in March, and I actually shared the statistics with that audience, and I think there was about 250 people in the audience. And I asked them by a show of hands to provide their feedback on whether or not that they, as internal auditors, felt that their own internal audit department is adequately equipped and resourced to handle these upcoming business changes and challenges. And of the 250 people or so in the room, only about 10 to 20% of them said that they do have the necessary resources and they're equipped to handle this change. And what's interesting about this is that A, it's unfortunate, B, we can all appreciate it, and C, it's actually consistent with a lot of other survey data about our industry. As always, there's plenty of internal audit thought leadership out there that highlights internal audit's need to improve. In 2017, PwC, in their State of the Internal Audit Profession study, they surveyed over 800 CFOs, CEOs, and audit committee members, asking if they thought that internal audit, or whether or not internal audit contributes value to their organization, and only 44% of our stakeholders stated that yes, their internal audit departments do contribute significant value. And what was even more troubling was that PwC asked the same questions to that same group and audience in 2015 and 2016, and each year this statistic dropped from 56% in 2015 to 44% in 2017. Not to be outdone, in the same aforementioned survey that I mentioned earlier, Deloitte, they asked over 600 chief audit executives whether or not that they, or we in our internal audit departments, that whether or not we are adding significant value and whether that we consider themselves, or whether that they consider themselves effective change agents. And only 28% of us stated that yes, we are adding significant value and we are change agents to our organization. Only 28% of us. So as Chris introduced, my name is Tom O'Reilly. I'm the Director of Business Development at Audit Board, and I'm also the Internal Audit Practice Leader. And prior to my current role, I've been an internal audit practitioner and leader for pretty much my entire career. I've been a Chief Audit Executive for a public company for 7 years. I've worked in a Big Four risk advisory practice. And I also founded an organization called the CAE Leadership Forum, which this was a New England-based networking and training organization for chief audit executives and other internal audit leaders that met bi-monthly to discuss internal audit trends and best practices, and sometimes, like I like to say, to even provide a shoulder for other CEAs to cry on. And like I said at the beginning, this will not be short of any bad jokes. But with that in mind, today I wanted to share with you 5 thoughts and ideas and practices on how we as internal auditors, regardless of your role, can improve our own internal audit performance by just tweaking some of the things that are normal to our practice of internal audit today. And I think that by improving our own internal audit performance, we're going to be able to not only have better job performance and like our jobs a little bit better, but we're also going to be helping our audit committee and board of directors better carry out their oversight responsibilities, and we're also going to help our management teams perform in their performance in the achieving of their organization's goals and objectives. And not only am I going to share these ideas, but what I'm hoping to do is to be able to provide a bunch of examples on how you can implement and take action on these strategies. So with that in mind, let's get started. So about a year ago, I had the opportunity to attend an internal audit executive training program where a lady who was both her organization's chief audit executive and her chief risk officer had the opportunity to talk to a group of 50 internal audit leaders about her approach to preparing her organization's ERM program. And all I could think to myself was, how awesome is this? And for an hour, the audience and I sat through this detailed discussion on the questions the CAE asked so many different executives at our organization, including and then also how, the number of different data points such as, volume and subjectivity and the likelihood for fraud and materiality, et cetera, that, each of these transactions or risk events were evaluated against, as well as the amount of time spent by her and her team assessing what constituted a high risk for their organization. And after a presentation, I was just overwhelmed with the amount of work and detail and nuance that was associated with their ERM program. And I jumped up and ran over to her to basically just continue the discussion. And I asked her with, kind of anticipation and amazement, and just wanted to know how cool and awesome the projects on our internal audit plan must have been. Basically they all must have been focusing on the processes that our organization relies on to carry out a new strategy or to achieve record growth or to make these key business decisions. But her response was, kind of, shall I say, underwhelming. So I asked her, and she said, "Oh, no, Tom. We don't really do those types of audits. This approach to ERM really helps our team determine which of the financial reporting processes are at the highest risk in each of our remote offices, and in turn helps us to determine what we're going to audit for the year." And as it sunk in, all I could think of was saying, what? What's the point of gathering all this data and performing all this different type of analysis just to say that you're going to audit revenue recognition and accounts payable 8 times this year? So unfortunately, even though this is an example that highlights a robust risk assessment, it also highlights that our industry has some pretty significant opportunities to improve the internal audit risk assessment process and how we can leverage it for internal audit success. For many internal audit departments that I'm aware of, their resources and their project plans are primarily driven by finance and accounting processes. Why is that? Perhaps it's because our risk assessment is just accounting focused. Perhaps we're just a bunch of CPAs, and our background is firmly cemented in accounting and finance. Or perhaps even worse, we don't even have an internal audit risk assessment and we propose audits based on we or what others think we should be doing. And if this is the case, what a wasted opportunity to add value. So to fix this, I recommend that all internal audit departments look to fix their own internal audit risk assessment process. So if to start, right, if your internal audit department currently does not perform a formal risk assessment process, make the time to do so. And anyone could do this, right? Obviously, starting with the CAE, but anywhere down to an experienced staff and senior, right? And I'll show you how to do this here in a moment. But if you already have a risk assessment, I think we can all look to improve it by taking inspiration from the mothership and all-knowing in internal audit, otherwise known as the Institute of Internal Auditors. And specifically, we should look to the definition of internal auditing. Now, I'm not going to read through the entire definition here, but I do want to highlight that internal audit is supposed to help its organization do what? It's supposed to help its organization accomplish its objectives. It doesn't state financial objectives. It doesn't state to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley or to detect fraud or to validate debits or credits or to audit travel and entertainment expenses. It states to help an organization achieve its objectives. So with that question in mind, what do we mean by organizational objectives? In my opinion, no matter what industry you work in or what kind of type of organization you work at, whether it be public or private or not-for-profit, et cetera, every organization kind of has four main type of objectives. The first is to increase revenues and market share. The second is to continually innovate new products and services. Next is to do both by managing the human resources that are associated with those objectives, whether they're employees or third parties. And then finally is to accomplish the first three objectives by either maintaining or decreasing the cost base to do so. So if we base our risk assessments off of all these criteria, a lot of processes such as sales and marketing and engineering and talent management, these could all easily be considered high risk because they address, the organization's most important objectives. But right now for our industry, that's not necessarily the case. In 2017, the MIS Training Institute surveyed over 400 internal auditors to find out, one simple thing. What's on their audit plan? What are they auditing during the year? And the results were, were equally not surprising and perhaps a tad bit disheartening. So, and I know that this is a little bit of a small print, but if you look at the top 5 audit projects that we're auditing to, cybersecurity, IT governance, accounts payable, controls over financial reporting, data management and privacy, right? These are all one, financial reporting processes, which we talked about earlier, or two, related to some sort of cybersecurity or IT initiative, which, as an internal auditor, and many of us have been in our roles for many years, this is nothing new to our organization. So, and while we've been, and while these are not new topics, the thought would be, or should be, is that these audit projects should have been on our audit plan for the past up to 10 or 15 years. And if that's the case, why are we continuing to audit this, right? So what can we do to kind of get more audit projects that are focused on the top risks of our organization that are focusing on the key objectives of our company? I think there's really two main ways, and I've found success in both of these, both of these practices. The first is to ask better risk assessment questions, and the second is to just use or present better resources in your risk assessment and draft audit plan. As it relates to the risk assessment questions, our team at Analog Devices, which was my last company where I was a Chief Audit Executive at, our team actually had a very simple approach to the risk assessment. We would ask 20 to 30 of the top executives of their organization kind of 4 or 5 different questions. The first was in regards to what do they perceive as, their departments and what's under their ownership, what are the key risks and objectives of their department. Second would be how do those risks and objectives roll up to, the overall company's risk and objective profile. Then we would ask them changes in what significant changes in people, process, and technology occurred within, the last 6 to 12 months, or they're expected to happen within, the next 12 months. And then finally, just to, understand kind of what are some of their major processes and department initiatives. I actually saw a couple of days ago that Richard Chambers, the CEO of the IAA, tweeted something along the lines of saying, in order to focus on what keeps your audit customers up at night, you should understand what they're spending most of their time on during the day. And I think that these last couple of questions, especially around understanding what their major processes and department initiatives are, will help you get there, right? And so what we didn't spend a lot of time on is validating and assessing these different risks, as it relates to, the broad spectrum of people that we talk to. We're able to get a great perspective on kind of what an organization would prevent our organization from being successful and from achieving our objectives. From that, we're able to then say, okay, should we be auditing these areas or not? So starting off with asking perhaps better, and I didn't say more, but just better risk assessment questions. The second way where our team has found a lot of success in being able to kind of focus our internal audit plan over the highest risks of an organization is by improving the way that we present our risk assessment resources. And actually what I'd like to do, as opposed to just talking about it, is to just show you what we did right now. So for those of you who are not familiar with this slide, what this is called a risk universe, right? Many of us may have also seen this as an audit universe. And one of the things that I would commonly do on an annual basis when we're presenting our audit plan to the audit committee or our board of directors was to show kind of the coverage that internal audit provided, or show the comprehensive assurance over the processes and risks that our internal audit team provided. And it was very simple for us to do, just by color coding. So we pick one color to say, here are all the areas that we focused on in the past, and here using another color saying, here's what we're proposing to audit in the future. And this slide was extremely powerful with our audit committee because what would happen every year I showed this was that it would start a conversation with the audit, the audit committee and others on the board, and they would start asking questions of saying, Tom, it looks like you're focusing your area on this process, but not this process. And why is that, right? And they would usually never come out and say exactly why they were asking the specific question. And I think we could all appreciate the audit committee is not just asking questions for the sake of asking questions. The way I internalized this was saying that, their questions came from an area that caused concern to them. And so if I were to have a discussion with them on my audit plan and be able to align our team's resources to what mattered most to them, I felt that I was truly, addressing the key risks to one of our, if not the most important stakeholder of our company. So if your internal audit team is not using this type of slide, I would highly recommend doing it. It'll definitely help you persuade others in your organization to be able to audit more high-risk areas and get your audit committee on board with those areas as well. The next way that I use to kind of perhaps influence and persuade our executive management team to kind of buy into helping our team audit perhaps non-routine areas over some of these objectives, business objectives that we're not normally associated with, was to just visually show them how the top risks of the company tie back to our audit plan. And for this example here, what I would do and what all of us could do is just take those top risks that we identify in our risk assessment program and then just map it back to what's on your audit plan, right? So if anyone ever asks you, saying, okay, Brian, why do you want to audit sales effectiveness this year or the marketing plan this year? Well, we've determined in our risk assessment, whether it's the ERM or the internal audit risk assessment, that management feels that sales and marketing are instrumental to our company's success. And as you can see it's listed right here. Having that conversation and showing them tactically how your audit projects map to the key risks is also a very powerful way to get those audit projects approved. And here's just another example of that and who we talk to. And the final way that I found success in getting buy-off on these new audit projects and around more important areas of the company is to focus it not on just what our stakeholders saying internal into the company, but just getting some external information as well. Productivity, I'm sure many of you here are familiar with Productivity, and on an annual basis, they issue this thought leadership report talking about the top enterprise risks to large organizations and large businesses. And that is a great opportunity to benchmark your audit plan against. And so in this situation, you would put these top business risks here to the left, and then you can map those again to the right, and you can show here's what's on your audit plan. If you didn't want to use the Productivity report, another commonly used resource in the internal audit community to identify what are some top risks of large Fortune 500 companies is the Corporate Executive Board's hotspots, right? I'm sure that if you contacted them, they'd be happy to give you a copy of their most current hotspot report. And then we would take that and just map it back to saying, okay, here's what an independent organization is saying are key risks in the business community, and here's what we're going to do to provide assurance over them in the next coming year.
Hey, Tom, this has been great. Thank you so far. We're going to go ahead and launch the poll question, and then we have a number of questions that have come up in our Q&A panel that I'll go ahead and throw to you as well. So what are the 4 main types of objective every organization has? Go ahead and submit your responses. We will keep this up for about a minute in case there's any delay. Everyone should be seeing the poll question. Is it continuously innovate, manage human resources, manage expenses, invest cash in short-term receivables, or one of the other two. So go ahead and submit your responses. Thank you so far, Tom, on this content. Let me go ahead, while this is running, let me go ahead and ask you one of these questions. Does the internal audit team have an obligation to complete a risk assessment prior to conducting an internal audit? Or does the IAA team measure compliance with the controls and processes established to address risks identified by management? What happens if they do not complete a risk assessment?
I mean, we could always do, we could always kind of carry out procedures that, you know, are not perhaps that they're not addressing our organization's top risks. But, you know, I think that what the internal audit industry runs into is that, you know, are we remaining relevant, right? And if we're not focusing on the areas that matter most to our company, the first question would be, why not? And I think my overall concern would be like, well, if it's not important to the company, and people start picking up on this, then what does that mean for us in the future, right? I think, you know, companies are getting leaner and meaner with their staffing, and if they have to continue to kind of, you know, reallocate resources or move resources around or even eliminate resources, and if we're not focusing on things that matter most, perhaps we'd be targets for a reduction in staff.
Great, thank you. Again, the poll question is live, and I did want to answer. We've had a few questions come in about the slides. The slides will be available at the conclusion of the webcast. We will be notifying you via email to receive a copy and a recording of the webinar. So everyone will get those, because this is a lot of great templates and information that you've shown so far, Tom. So we're going to go ahead and close this poll question and move on to the results. So let's see what everyone has to say. Tom?
So it looks like a majority of us have been paying attention, right? So the top 4 objectives of an organization, at least in my opinion, would be to increase revenues, continuously innovate, manage our human resources, and manage expenses, right? The others are close, right? But I think that some of them get a bit too specific.
This was the tricky one where there's always a better answer, right?
Could be. Absolutely. But I think like by and large people are. That's right. You know, I guess I'm a little concerned. I was equating more of this presentation, like I said earlier, to the Rolling Stones, and now you're equating it more to a DMV. So I think hopefully we'll be able to meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Right,
one of the questions that we have, Tom, really quick. Just in relation to the last topic here, someone had asked if it seems we can't reduce our focus on the ICFR because our external auditors continue to ask for more focus there. How can you move away from that?
You know, I think it's a good question. I think, you know, many internal audit departments, you know, find themselves spending a majority of their time on SOX, and I think it's just because that's what their company needs them to do. There are ways that a lot of companies are finding now to reduce a lot of the administrative time associated with Sarbanes-Oxley, as well as just improve the control performance within the organization. And so that's one way. And I think that the other way would be, you know, SOX for most is not a full-time effort, or ICFR is not a full-time, 12-month effort. So even if your team is spending just three months out of the year auditing, performing operational audit projects, you can make those operational audit projects count. And what I think you'll find is that the more time you're spending over those key areas of the organization, and the better assurance that you're providing, and if that assurance is impactful to the organization, executives may actually think to consider to increase internal audit resources, which doesn't happen. But at my last company, we started out as a team of two, and within 5 years we were a team of 8, and plus we had a significant budget for co-sourced and consulting spend. So I think executive teams do value the assurance they provide. We just need to focus on the areas that matter most. So why don't we do this? With that being said, let's move on to the second area that we could kind of look to increase or evolve our current audit practices. As I've met a bunch of other chief audit executives, I'd always kind of talk to them about my thoughts and approach to the internal audit risk assessment. And it would be funny because, a lot of these individuals would, or a number of these individuals would, come back and they'd reach out to me like 2, 3, 4 months later and say, hey, Tom, I actually kind of took your approach to heart, and I kind of tried to do that in my own organization, and it worked. And I was like, great. And it's like, no, now I'm kind of, pardon my language, screwed. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, how could you possibly, be in a tough situation if you're positioned, you've got all these new non-routine audits on your project that are focusing on the areas that matter most of your company? And they would routinely say, yeah, but I've never audited these areas before. How am I supposed to know what I need to do, right? And so this segues extremely nicely into our second recommendation is to increase the use of subject matter expertise in our audit projects, in each and every individual audit project, right? So I bet if there was a survey done of the internal audit industry, and a survey question that stated basically what is the most commonly Googled theme for internal audit, chances are the theme or the keyword search would be something along the lines of XYZ audit program or how to audit XYZ, right? We've all done it, right, including myself, plenty of times, trying to figure out exactly what are the key steps and procedures that our internal audit teams could take to audit something that we're not as familiar with. That is one way of going about an audit project, but there's actually a different way, and that's by using subject matter experts. So when I was at my Big Four advisory firm, I had the opportunity to work with an internal audit department of a Fortune 100 company that spent a boatload of money on internal audit. And my responsibility was a little bit unique. I was kind of more of an admin person between the Big Four firm and the internal audit department. And one of my roles was that every time this internal audit team was planning for a non-routine audit type project, I would go out to the Big Four firm and in their consulting practice and find, that consultant who specializes in this area, right? So basically this was a practice that I then took to my current company when I was the Chief Audit Executive, and it was something that added significant. It's probably the thing that added the most significant and credibility to our team. So what did that look like, right? So we would go out to an advisory firm, and let's just say we're going to audit customer service, right? And so we would work with this director of consulting at one of the perhaps Big Four firms, and this person specialized in customer service, and they would spend probably about 50 hours over the course of a 500-hour audit with us, right? We would first kind of meet with them to kind of understand and plan our audit, right? They would help us create our initial pre-planning questionnaire. They would sit in on the meetings that we had with our audit customer, right, during our planning meeting. And this was always great because we would sit down and we'd go through all of our 10 or 15 questions. The internal audit would ask the audit customer. The audit customer would always then, even though we asked open-ended questions, they somehow figured out how to give us closed-ended answers. And after about 45 minutes of kind of this back and forth and asking the questions, the subject matter expert on the phone would ask 1 or 2 questions, and then the floodgates would open, and we would get such a dearth of great information that would help us understand what are the key risks to that process that we're auditing. So in addition to help us communicating with our audit customer and uncovering the key risks, that individual then help us create the audit program. We would sit there and kind of bounce some ideas on how to test those controls, and that person would provide us with some specific information. During field work, right, we never had the subject matter expert in the field actually at all, but the only time that we would use them during field work was that if we did come across something that seemed to be out of the ordinary or a control issue, we'd just pick them up the phone and say, what do you think? And they'd tell us to dig deeper, or it's not that big of a deal. So they'd help us save time and resources. But perhaps most importantly, where we gained benefits from the from using a subject matter expert was during the reporting phase, right? So normally at the end of an audit project, perhaps the Chief Audit Executive or someone from the internal audit leadership team would sit down with the audit customers, director or vice president of the process, and kind of hammer out any issues identified. And with the subject matter expert in place, it was no longer where internal audit would just recommend an action plan based, basically it would wax poetic saying, this is what we think you need to do because I'm an internal audit and this is what you should do, right? It was now seen, internal audit was now seen as a, kind of a trusted advisor or consultant because we brought that subject matter expertise in. This person, had experience of what the Fortune 500 are doing to improve this specific process, right, for this example, customer service. And the audit customer saw it as free benchmarking and free consulting, right? So, no longer were people kind of running away from internal audits once the word got out about this approach. And quite frankly, the opposite happened. Myself and our team, we had more and more people, hearing about this throughout the business, and they'd come up to us and they'd say, hey, look, we heard that you're able to bring in some outside help to help you with your audit, and therefore they were able to get additional help to improve their process. Is this something that you could help us with as well? Right, and we had to start evaluating some of those requests to make sure that they were still focused on the top risks of the organization. So, for anyone who is not using subject matter expertise, and specifically in regards to kind of having someone from perhaps a consulting firm, whether it be a Big Four firm or other, I couldn't recommend you looking into it more. For some people, this approach may not be the case, and maybe they don't have the budget to bring in that outside help or whatnot. But if that's the case, there's still some other things that you can do, and there's still some unique resources that you can use to bring in that subject matter expertise. Now, another way would be to join a trade association, right? I remember our team was auditing talent management and leadership development at our organization one time, and for whatever reason, we couldn't find the right subject matter expert to help us. So what do? We actually bought 2 or 3 licenses to SHRM, which is basically the human resources equivalent of the IIA. So I think it's the Society of Human Resource Management. And then we contacted a couple of their content managers, and we basically said, okay, here's what we're looking to do. Now that we're members, can you help us? And they loved it. They thought it was a great idea. And so we wound up having a couple of calls with those individuals, right, who are liaising with, all of their members, focusing on this one specific topic. And not only were we able to get information related to the top risks of that area, but we'll also be able to get so much best practices and emerging trends and how those processes are changing, and we can share that with our own auditees and our audit customers. So definitely look into getting information from a trade association that would be related to the audit topic that you're performing. And then even some more simple examples, right? Just by keeping current reading, what's on Harvard Business Review, or for those of you who have memberships to the Corporate Executive Board, or just even trade periodicals, that type of information, including those resources, can go a long way in the audit projects that you and your team are performing. And then finally, if your resources allow, perhaps if your company is a bit more decentralized and centralized, you can bring in some other employees from similar departments but in different locations with your company. They can provide you with some perspective on, how these risks are being addressed in different parts of the company. Right now, I know everyone's getting a little tight now, saying, "Oh, that's not independent, et cetera." That's fine. I mean, obviously, you can work through the independence issues with you and your team, and if there is truly an independence issue, I wouldn't suggest doing it. But it's just another opportunity to be able to provide more value and to provide more assurance to the executive management teams and your audit committee around this specific topic. So here's a couple examples of how to get buy-in to use subject matter experts, right? The first way is to share the idea with your audit committee chairperson, the CEO, CFO. Our team only used the subject matter experts actually between 20 and 50 hours. Actually, it's probably more closer to 20 and 30 hours per project. So even though perhaps standard rates would be applied, since these are not big projects for those teams, in general, the cost of using a subject matter expert was not significant as it compared to the cost of the overall audit to be performed. So just consider, getting the buy-in from your CEO, CFO. If your organization is using perhaps, say, a Big Four firm who's not your external auditor for other types of projects, you can tell your CFO to tell their business development rep, saying, hey, this is something that we want to do. If you can help us with this and keep your rates at a reasonable, keep your rates reasonable, we'll at least bring you to the table anytime we have a new tax project or human resource project or some sort of project that firm would offer. So that's just an idea. And now, Chris, I think we're at another polling question.
Yeah, our second poll question. Which of the following is not a great choice to find subject matter expertise for non-routine audit projects? Which one would it be? And we'll go ahead and let people answer. So you should see question number 2 on your screen. Tom, a couple of questions that have come in is, if you're small or you don't have, I'm going to ask 2 of these together, but if you're small team, maybe you see any in a staff auditor, or you don't have enough money, how do you determine where to set your priorities or find subject matter experts?
I think that if you can't use subject, maybe this question was asked before I got to some of the other examples, but I would say, like if you're going to do like a human resource audit, like the example I gave, the talent management, leadership development process, if you're going to audit that at your company, join SHRM. Right? They've got a wealth of great information that you can use to leverage in your audit program. I think, don't quote me on this, but I think that memberships to these types of associations range anywhere from $600 to $1,000, right? So in the grand scheme of things, I think the IA put some research out that says the average cost of an average audit in our industry is between $35,000 and $40,000. Spending $2,000 or $3,000 more per audit is a drop in the bucket compared to the value that you're going to get out of that, as opposed to just looking for, to the internet for an audit program over an area that you may not have audited before.
All right, thank you. So we are going to leave this open. Again, the second poll question is up. Go ahead and answer. Click submit. So I have a guess on this one, and it probably refers back to your joke about a shoulder to cry on. So I'm going to go ahead and close it. So your grandmother, yes, great shoulder to cry on, but probably not the person you're going to go to for subject matter expertise.
If anyone's concerned, we'll keep this information between us and everyone on the line. We will not tell your grandmothers about your feedback.
All right,
cool.
Let's go ahead and go to number 3 now.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect. All right. So we talked about evolving our current internal audit practices, first by improving and evolving our internal audit risk assessment. The second is by improving the type of subject matter expertise we're using on each and every individual audit project. When I was part of the Chief Audit Executive Leadership Forum, and I was meeting with all these different CAEs, one of the things that I was able to do was to perform a benchmark of, I was just very curious of what other internal audit leaders are sharing with their audit customers and with their their management teams and the board of directors. And I asked, about 40 to 50 people who participated in this to send me a sanitized copy of your, audit report template. And after looking through, I think it was the number of 45 audit report templates, there was kind of one consistent theme that stuck out about these audit report templates. And the only way I can describe it is in this phrase. And the phrase is, shame on us, right? After looking at so many audit report templates, it became quickly apparent that there is vast opportunity to improve what we're sharing. By and large, a number of the people probably were definitely subject matter experts in finance and accounting and in internal audit, but they perhaps were definitely not subject matter experts in designing and preparing a visually appealing audit report. So even just from a design point of view and putting something in front of your stakeholders that looks professional, we definitely had some opportunity to improve on. And then second is in regards to the information that reporting within that report, which we'll actually talk about now. So if we think of the audit report as internal audit's ultimate product, right? If this is what we're in business to provide, right? We're in business to provide assurance. We provide assurance through communicating with our different stakeholders, the audit committee, the executive management team, and our audit customers. And the channel that we use to communicate this assurance is through the audit report. Here's where we have kind of two main areas to improve, or evolve. You know, the first is around quality, and the second is around timeliness. You know, from a quality perspective, the best way I kind of think about this is when I was at that Big Four firm working in the advisory practice, I was working with a client of ours at one point. The pretty well-known internal audit company. They were definitely the creme de la creme as it relates to internal audit. And I had the opportunity to participate in an audit project and actually, as a manager, draft an audit report. So I submitted it back to the audit director on that team. And then he asked me, it's like, hey, Tom, can you put some time on our calendars? Maybe we'll need about 2 to 3 hours and let's go through this audit report. And I was pumped because, you know, they presented their audit report in a very narrative format, and they were always trying to be kind of short and concise. And there were a lot of issues that were identified in this project, and so I was able to kind of get, in a narrative format, the audit report to 3 pages, or 3 or 4 pages. And what I found was that when we sat down, we put the 3 to 4 pages up on a video conference, that I had massive opportunities to be more concise. To start looking at a macro level, looking at the strategy of what was being included in the report and what we're trying to communicate to our stakeholders. So starting at that macro level and then working all the way down to the micro level. And what I mean by the micro level is looking at the purpose and understanding and deciding what the purpose of each paragraph will be, each sentence will be, and even what word will be. And by and large, at the end of this exercise, we were able to reduce the size of that audit report to 3.5 pages to 3/4 of 1 page. And it was amazing, right? Everything that I said in the 3.5 pages was still said in that 3/4 of the page, and all the fluff was taken out. So I would recommend, for if your teams aren't doing it now, I know that we all spend a ton of time making sure that what we're reporting is accurate and complete and reliable. I would also recommend that we spend a little bit more time focusing on how we communicate and being strategic about how exactly we're going to say what we want to communicate. The next is in regards to what we're going to include in our report. Many of us probably, are identifying a number of observations through our audits, and we rank them high, medium, or low, and then we include them and prioritize them in the report as such. I can guarantee you, if internal audit is thinking or considers something as medium risk or low risk, then chances are the executive management team and the audit committee absolutely think of those as medium or low risk, or not nearly as important at all. So if the audit committee and the executive management team don't deem items as high risk, don't put them in the audit report, right? You could definitely follow up with your audit customers and make sure that those issues are addressed and remediation action plans are being implemented, but it doesn't mean that you have to communicate everything to the audit committee. But then with that being said, to improve the quality of the audit report, make sure that you are taking measures to over-communicate the risks that you actually are providing assurance over, right? There's probably many times where maybe some of us have performed, for example, a social media audit. And for the social media audit, right, maybe someone on the audit committee doesn't necessarily understand what's actually being audited or why that's important. So as opposed to just providing a background summary of how the process works and the issues that are associated with it, make sure that you're taking pains to over-communicate why this process or why this audit was important, why the assurance is important. Transitioning over to the timeliness, this is also another big area to improve, and this should not be moved to internal audit. There's actually a couple of really very tactical things that anyone from a senior to a CAE can do to improve the timeliness of when we issue that final audit report. The first is at the very beginning of the audit, set expectations with the audit customer, saying, look, here's our ultimate goal. We need to we need to finish this audit by this time with a finished audit program, and then work backwards with your calendar on how you're going to achieve that, right? While you're working in the audit, you can also develop the audit report during field work, right? So if you identify an issue and say you have a weekly status update with your customer, as opposed to just kind of talking about it, start documenting what the issue is, what the business risk is, what your recommendation could be, and perhaps even what their management action plan would be. And theoretically, at the end of a 3 or 4 week audit, if you had your last status meeting on this document that's your agenda, if you have all the agreed upon language for these issues and business risks and recommendations, theoretically it should be a copy and paste into the audit report, send it off, and everyone's already seen it, so we should be able to issue that report in no time. And then finally, just to take some work off your customer's plate, CAEs and internal audit leaders have a great opportunity as opposed where a lot of log jam happens is field work ends. You go over the outstanding issues with your audit customer, and then you say, okay, I'm going to send you the audit report. Can you please provide us your documented management action plans? Can you do it in 1 or 2 weeks? 2 weeks comes, or the day before 2 weeks, the deadline comes, and they'll say, hey, we need some more time. And then finally, when they do send it to you, you need to make changes, and there's always back and forth, and there's never communication. A better way to solve that problem is say, hey, look, we know that you need to get remediation action plans approved by your higher-ups. Why don't we schedule a meeting a week from now? Once you have those conversations, and you tell me what it is that you and your team are going to do to address this issue, and while you dictate, I'll document. If you have any issues, if I have any issues with what you're saying, I can tell you then. If you have any issues with what I'm documenting, you can tell me then, and we're going to wrap up the report. So here's just an example. In the interest of time, I won't go through it all, but here's an example of our audit report. It highlights the executive summary here, as well as the example of how an issue would be documented. The big thing for us is that this is more of a process than it was an art, or more of a science, as it was an art. And if we stuck to our strategy on how to document everything, we found that there's a lot less time going back and forth, either internally during our reviews or externally with the audit customer. So that's the third area to evolve. The fourth area just kind of piggybacks off of improving the audit report, and I found it during that same type of benchmark, but it relates to improving the audit committee report. So to provide some perspective, for those who are involved in reporting to the audit committee, whether it's preparing the report or if you're a chief audit executive reporting to the audit committee, chances are you're probably summarizing and communicating the results of the audits that have been done. And by and large, a lot of us will always go so far to provide some metrics on internal audit and how great or perhaps how great we're not doing within the past period, whether it's a quarter or a year or whatnot. And I found that one of the big consensus and themes in regards to the audit committee reports that were provided was that they, outside of the past audit results that were being communicated to the audit committee, anything else that was included in the audit committee was all about the internal audit team and perhaps its effectiveness and maybe its efficiency, and not necessarily about the company, right? And so while internal audit, I'm sure we can all agree that internal audit is important, the audit committee only gives us perhaps at most 10 to 12 minutes per meeting to provide them with the information that they need to carry out their oversight responsibilities. So in order for us to kind of be better at carrying out those responsibilities, we should suggest, I suggest that everyone take some consideration and talk less about internal audit and talk more about what else is going on within the business. And an area where our teams have always found success in is in two areas, actually. First is highlighting and performing some analysis on prior control issues and themes. And the second is, providing some information, analysis, and insight on perhaps emerging risks and trends. Right. So one way we were able to do this on a periodic basis, our team would analyze all the current, outstanding, or previously identified audit issues and map them to the internal control components where there was which was the reason that caused the breakdown in the control. Right. And so we'd say on a periodic basis, if we had 100 outstanding issues, 20 of them were related to control environment, 40 of them were related to risk assessment, and 60 of them were related to information and communication. And with that type of information, then the CAE can then take that and say, hey, look, it seems like we really have some kind of consistent, themes of areas to improve with our information and communication, whether it's validating data coming in and out of the process. So as opposed to internal audit going out and finding those same types of issues, why don't we just have the management team, suggest to all these key departments to say, hey, can you self-assess on how you're doing and prove to internal audit, or send some information to internal audit on how these areas are these controls are operating effectively. And think about just what happened, right? No longer do you have to go out and continue to find the same issue through all these different audits, but now you're getting assurance from the management team, and they're providing to you way more. Everyone's providing to you more, thoroughly and quickly, and you don't have to go out and do an audit to understand where those continued problems occur. So by providing that information to the audit committee, it's going to definitely help you get the buy-in to push management to be able to perform all those self-assessments. So that's definitely one way, providing them with some themes and issues around, or themes that are consistent within previously identified issues. And the second specifically is in regards to performing analysis on emerging risks. So now we're at our next polling question.
Yes, our final polling question with just a couple of minutes left in the webinar. I know you have your fifth point you may have to rush through, but let's go ahead and allow everyone the time to answer this one. Audit committee reports are more useful to audit committee members and executive management when they focus more on what? Go ahead and give people time to answer this, about 20 more seconds. Make sure everyone sees this on the screen. All right. Go ahead and jump to the next, to the poll results.
We have some internal audit truthers out there that still want to highlight how great they are. And I can appreciate that.
They are pretty great.
But I think that we are pretty great. So why don't we do this? My last point is going to take basically 2 minutes, 3 minutes. So let's talk about that real quick. So, in regards to evolving, current internal audit practices, I think that while this is perhaps the most subjective, I think it's also perhaps the most important. And that is in regards to working with the spirit of customer service, right? So, unfortunately, I'm sure many of us have probably met or experienced or have heard of our reputation that, internal auditors are bean counters, or they're introverts, or they're curmudgeons, or they're not necessarily, or people just think that we have to do something because the internal audit team said so to do. And I really think that, it's very, very easy for us as internal auditors, especially those who want to be considered contemporary, forward-thinking, to break out of that mold. And I think that if you think of, your own internal audit as your own business within the organization, it's actually very, very easy to do so. So, here's a couple of examples on what we can do to work with the spirit of customer service. And again, this will be completely subjective to everyone, but just keeping in mind, I was like saying, hey, look, you know what's tough? Internal audit is tough. It is darn tough, right? But you know what's even tougher than internal audit is being audited, right? Chances are none of our audit customers are stopping what they're currently doing so they can focus their time, on working with the audit team, right? They've got to now juggle both balls and responsibilities. Chances are a lot of people don't necessarily know exactly what internal audit is, and they just use this premonition, and they're very nervous because they think if we find something that, shoot, perhaps they could get fired, right? So any type of measures that we can take to minimize disruption with our audit customers and make them feel like we're here in the spirit of customers or continuous improvement, and we're not here to find everything that you're doing wrong, but to help you do more things right, I think is going to go a long way, right? Working with the spirit of customer service could include kind of over-communicating what it is that you're supposed to be doing, extolling the virtues of internal audit, right? Just saying, hey, look, if this area wasn't extremely important to the success of the organization, then I wouldn't be here, or I shouldn't be here. And then just very simply, just smile and enjoy your work, right? We all go through this thing called life once, right? Let's actually have some fun and do it, right? No one forced us to be an internal audit. We all chose to do this. We all stepped into this thinking that we can add value and we can enable positive change throughout our organization. So for a more tactical example on how to work with the spirit of customer service, how about just ask for some feedback every once in a while, right? So after every audit, just ask them a couple of questions, and then you can find out exactly how you can improve your service based off of the feedback of your prior audit customers so that your future audit customers will walk away giving you a standing ovation. So that's
Tom,
it,
as you close
right?
here, I wanted to mention that if you want to actually go to the next one, we had a number of questions that came in that we were unable to answer. If you do have questions, feel free to email Tom and call him as well. Just want to make sure everyone saw that, because there was a lot of questions we didn't get to and due to time. But anyway, I want to thank you, Tom, and I'm going to allow you to close still and allow everyone to go ahead and close the webinar and answer their survey so that they can get their CBE credits. But go right ahead.
Great, thanks, Chris, and thank you everybody for your time today. Just to end, it's very easy to make a significant impact to your organization through internal audit. If you haven't done any of these, or if you haven't taken any of these types of strategies, I challenge you to do so. I think that you'll find that it's actually a lot easier than you thought, and you actually have a lot more success than actually what you would consider. If you have any questions, if you want to talk, please contact me and call me. If you want some of the templates that I showed today, shoot me an email, give me a call, and we'll arrange it to make it happen. So thank you, everybody, and good luck.
Thanks, everyone. I want to thank Tom and Chris and Audit Board for today's webcast, and a quick reminder to everyone to please finish your post-webcast survey, and if you've completed all the system requirements, you'll be prompted to download your personalized certificate. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful day.